Welcome to our second live session of successful negotiation and communication in Corona times. Not only this is applicable in Corona times, but because of Corona, we are recording all of our lectures live and we are streaming them and storing them on my YouTube channel. So last time we talked a little bit already about the basics of communication, and we quickly recap a little bit because the recording was lost for some reason, technical reason. The main psychological thing and framework about communication can be derived from the picture here. We saw that and we discussed that here, this one, because what is remarkable about the picture is, and we said that if you ask children what do they see, more than 90% they just see the dolphins here. More than 90% of children being under the age of 10 just see the dolphins, and they see the dolphins first, of course, but they don't see the couple. And the majority of adults, they're just seeing the couple. They're just seeing the couple. And when being asked, some of them said, "Oh yeah, I'm seeing some dolphins as well." So the implication for communication is paramount. It's mind-blowing, because the world is what we think it is, or what we would like it to be. We create expectations about our environment. We do that all the time. So we have first impression of persons, of political parties, of certain kind of incidents, and then we try always to manifest them, to emphasize, to strengthen them, and every subsequent perception is perceived in the same kind of way. So our experience and our expectations to strongly influence how we perceive other people and the world around us. And we act and we perceive always in accordance with the image we have of certain kind of things. And that is very, very interesting, because we have a very selective perception. We always try to reassure that our original perception was correct and was the only appropriate one. But of course, it's not the only appropriate one. As we've seen here with the old woman here, the chin of the old woman, or it can be the chin of the young woman here. There are always different kind of perceptions possible of things. However, we always want our perception to be the right one. Why? What is this? What is inherent in our psychology, in our social soul or social brain, so to say? What do we want to do? We always want to look for affirmation. That is the technical term we should need to know. Affirmation or reaffirmation. We want to reassure ourselves that our perception, our view of the world is the correct one. And everything that is not in line with our perception of reality is filtered. Therefore, we have a selective perception. Why do we have that? Because we look for affirmation, and everything that is not in line is causing, and that the term is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. So this is causing some kind of confusion between our expectations and now certain kind of new kind of stimuli which are not in line with our original perception. And because we don't like that, because we don't like cognitive dissonance, we are filtering, we have this selective perception. And that has to be seen in a big context. And why is that important? Why is communication overall important? Because it is here on the slide. The main thing is that the relevance of effective communication is shown by the following statistics, and these are global numbers. It's not to say this is 80%, it could be 82 or 85, doesn't make any difference, but just for the proportion, you have to take into consideration 80% of the day is spent communicating in some form, personally, professionally, so in private life, in business life. But the most important thing is that 75% of working hours of top management is spent on communication, because, and that is what I was talking about in other lectures, the higher you move up in the hierarchy of any kind of organization, the less technical skills are important. The higher you move up, the less technical skills are important. Why is that? Because if you have power, if you have control, if you need to manage coordinate the work of activities of a group of people, of a department, of many people, of many departments, the more communication is important and the less technical skills are paramount, because you have your experts for certain kind of responsibilities and certain kind of tasks and activities. So you have people in marketing, you have people in finance, you have people in HR, and your job as a top manager is just to coordinate their work activities, to guide them, to motivate them, to make them achieve certain kind of companies' objectives, organization-wide objectives. And therefore, the higher you move up, communication is always important, but the higher you move up in communication, the more non-technical skills are paramount. Non-technical skills means presentation skills, communication skills, project management skills, rhetorics, all this conceptual thinking, this being able to think out of the box, thinking ahead. All these these aspects are getting more and more important the higher you move up in the organization. Therefore, I would say that, for example, I would never have been promoted to work in the staff department, global strategy, in the global headquarters of Shell in London, if I wouldn't have been a good communicator, if I wouldn't have been able to work across what we call levels and countries. So you should be able, as a manager, to work with multiple people, different cultures, different nations, and different kind of educational level. There are some people who are very, very clever, but they can only work at the top level of the organization or only with clever people. I once heard it from a McKinsey consultant, and he said, I can only work with the vice president or with vice president levels, and the others, I don't know, because they don't understand what I'm saying. That is very arrogant, and basically he wasn't a team player. He was intellectually brilliant, but he was not able to really engage with normal people, and you need everybody in the organization. A good manager, a good communicator, a good top manager is in a position to engage, to motivate, to lead, to coordinate across the levels of the organization. He needs, or she needs, to be able to address people who founded a company, as well as the secretaries and the non-managerial employees at the bottom of the pyramid. So you need to be able to lead and communicate across levels and across cultures. Ineffective communication, we know that, is the cause of loss of information, yes, but also 80% loss of businesses. So a business can be lost, in particular when it comes to service organizations, which are marketing services, right? So in the restaurant business, in the hotel business, for example. Therefore, like I said, communication is very key, and I think we can improve substantially. Being also professor at international universities such as Regent's University in London or the Cambridge Judge Business School in Cambridge, I see that a lot of universities abroad, they are doing better, in particular the American ones or the Anglo-American ones, in promoting and putting an emphasis on the so-called soft skills. Of course, you need the technical skills, but moreover, more importantly, I would say, you need the soft skills in order to bring a company forward, also in particular in those days now. And you see it every day, how important appropriate communication is. The problem of communication can be derived from this slide here, because looking at genius Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he said, people only hear what they understand. They only hear what they understand. What is meant by that? Goethe meant that we are perceiving the world always in the same kind of way. Why? Because we have this selective perception, because we're looking for affirmation, because we want to prevent cognitive dissonance from happening, from disturbing us. Therefore, we only hear what we expect we should be hearing. So this is meant by that kind of phrase. Also, writer genius Mark Twain said, "We admire those people who openly speak their mind as long as they think the same as us." That is a brilliant quote. It is a super brilliant quote, I would say. Why? Because what is Mark Twain suggesting here? Basically, it's similar to the psychological aspects we discussed already. We admire those people who openly speak their mind as long as they think the same as us. Why is that? Why do we admire those kind of people? What are they doing on a psychological level? Type in the chat functions to answer. What is happening? What are those? Yes, Apen. Yes, they are affirming us, reassuring us that our view of the world is the right one. So it is kind of affirmation. Therefore, we are feeling more sympathy also for the people who are like-minded. Why? Because basically it's a kind of, you can see it, and now I'm making a whiteboard here, and we can also we can make it a blackboard, because a blackboard is nicer. We can better read on that here. So it's a bit like a kind of walkie-talkie. If this is a walkie-talkie here, and this is another walkie-talkie, so resembling, using walkie-talkies as analogy for the communication between people. We are having a certain kind of frequency, a default frequency we are using to communicate. This is coming from our personality, from our experience, from our education, from our perception in the past. And if the other person is communicating basically on the same kind of wavelengths, we have, like I said, we're on the same agenda. Yeah, we share the same heartbeat. So the other person is reassuring, is affirming our perception of the world, of reality, and we are always looking for that. If another person is having a different kind of frequency here, it is important to tune in to his frequency in order to make him understand what I want to bring across. It is not working, so communication is disturbed if there are two kind of frequencies that people are using. So, and that is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. One of my all-time favorite cartoons. I got it from this source here. The key to successful negotiation lies in the ability to take the perspective of your communication partner and see the world through his eyes. That is the most important thing about communication you should understand. It is not to criticize. For example, let's take Donald Trump or Putin or Angela Merkel. If you don't agree with some saying of them, first what you need to do, you need to understand what is their perspective, what is their view of the world. Henry Ford said a couple of brilliant things, and he said, if there is one secret to success on the planet, I have it on a later slide, if there is one secret to success, it is this: to be able to see the world through the eyes of other people. Now, if you look at the cartoon here, who is right? They both are. It's like with the dolphins and the couple, right? They both are. There are multiple perspectives, but from the perspective of this person here, it's a 6. From his perspective, it's a 9. Both are correct. And if you look at, for example, have you seen the Netflix series El Chapo or Narcos? Have you seen those? Who did see that? Yes, you know that. And what about Pablo Escobar? Was he a bad guy? Was he a criminal? people would say, of course, what was Pablo Escobar's view about himself? Did he perceive himself as being a murderer? Did he perceive himself as being a criminal? What was his view? No, he didn't. And interestingly, what happened was, and you can see a documentary of the making of this Netflix series of Narcos. Yeah, he was like the hero of Medellin. He felt, and when he died, and the funeral happened and occurred, there were more than 10,000 people. And they were mourning, and he was, and still, there's another documentary of this Netflix series about how they made it, and they were interviewing normal people there in this region, and some of those people said, "Oh, Pablo Escobar, he was a superstar. He was a hero. He's something like a saint, right? Why? Because he also built playing fields, soccer fields, for example. He was supporting schools, poor people. I'm not saying that he's a good guy. The only thing I'm saying is it is not that easy. So for some people, he's a criminal and he was a murderer, which in fact he was, right? He was responsible for the killing of several thousands of people. However, he was also doing good things for normal people. So it depends on whom you're asking. So who is right? So sometimes it is a bit difficult to understand that. The same for Al Capone. You can read his autobiography, and Al Capone thought of himself as being a good guy. Al Capone thought of himself as being a good guy. So from his perspective, he was a good guy, and he was always looking for this affirmation, like we are doing as well, right? So we are doing the same kind of thing. It is a lovely cartoon which perfectly illustrates how communication works. In order to be successful, you need to take the position of the other people. You can even be a bit more philosophic, because if you read Platon's cave story, you know that? The cave story of Platon. We have prisoners, and they have chains, and they are bound to a wall, and they could not really see the world outside. They can only see the shadows of people passing by. So they don't see actually the real world. So it's their perspective, but they think it is the real world, what they see. Or Kant said, and Hegel, they have an analogy that we are running around with glasses. So, and somebody is wearing green glasses, like sunglasses, and so the world appears to be green. Another one is having blue glasses, so it's a nice analogy. So for him, the world, or for her, the world looks completely different. So in order to successfully communicate, in the end, you need to take off your glasses, literally, and put on the other glasses and say, oh wow, this is how the world looks from your perspective. Because if you don't do that, the other person doesn't feel affirmed, doesn't feel appreciated, and if he or she doesn't, you don't have the same wavelength. And if you don't have the same wavelength, it is miscommunication. The other person doesn't get the feeling, is not getting the feeling that he or she is being understood in a sophisticated way. I love the presidential elections. I don't know whether they will be postponed due to Corona times. It may happen. But in a famous town hall debate, Bill Clinton versus George W. Bush in 1992, we have a town hall debate. So there are different kind of debates that the president and the challenger usually have on television. They are aired via television. And one format is called the town hall debate. And in the town hall debate, the president and his challenger are meeting usually at the university, and then they are discussing problems, and they're answering questions that are being raised by the audience, by normal people, by students, by normal people, workers. And in this famous debate in 1992, there was an unemployed person. He lost his job. I think he was a steel worker, and he was asking the president, Mr. President, what would you do to cope with this structural problem in this region here, in this particular region? I lost my job, and economy is not doing fine, and what are you going to do to help us, right? And then you must understand, the format is always that the president and the challenger, they have a certain kind of period amount of time to be able to answer the question. So it's 2 minutes. It's a famous sentence. Mr. President, 2 minutes. Then he has 2 minutes to answer the question. And the president was trying to answer. But what happened was that every once in a while, Bush was looking at his watch. And what happened in the end was he lost not only the debate, but he lost the election to, as we know, to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was elected president. But why did he lose? Not only because he was looking at his watch, but moreover, what this impression was that was coming across. What was the impression? Literally, some people, not all people, perceived that Bush had no time for the problems of ordinary people. That was the perception. It could be a bit unfair. Probably the president was just checking whether he's within the 2 minutes answering time. But the perception was that the president is not aware of the problems of ordinary people. And psychologists are pretty sure that this made George W. Bush lose the election against Bill Clinton. So perception, so therefore I've wrote perception, I'm sorry, that's a typo. Perception makes reality. And I'm also coaching a lot of students, former students, and also top managers. And I always tell them, it is not important what you say. It is not even important what you do. What is important in the end is how it is perceived what you say, and how it is perceived by the others what you do. Perception makes reality. And the problem is that perception differs, right? Because look again at this one here. Who's right? What is the right perception? Is there only one perception? No, of course not. There are multiple ones. So you always have to ensure that your actions and your communication, how this comes across with other people. And everybody has a different kind of perspective. So it is that makes communication so difficult. It is very paramount, but this makes communication so difficult. So it doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't matter what we do. It is only crucial how it is perceived what we say and what we do. And I was telling last week when we had the live session, I was telling you about the experience I had in London when I was passing by the desk of this lady in finance. And I was telling you that she perceived my joke to be criticism. And from this moment on, I learned, this was a key learning for me. I experienced that this is deeply true, that it all depends on the perception, and this perception makes reality for all of us. Let's talk a little bit about theory of communication. So one of the most important and influential thinkers in communication was, and still is, Paul Watzlawick. He died more than 10 years ago, and he set up different kind of axioms. So basically 5 ones, and let's look at the first 2 ones because they are the most important for our course. First one, and this is a famous, everybody knows about that, like cogito ergo sum. One cannot not communicate. So every time people perceive each other, they communicate with each other, even if you don't say a word. Because even if you are looking outside of the window, it is signaling something. If I talk or if my wife talks to me and we are engaged in a conversation, and in parallel, because I'm multitasking capable, I'm reading the newspaper, she might get the impression I'm not really listening. Try it out, and we all have privately, we all have this kind of experience. So it is not only good enough to listen to the other person, for example, you also need to bring this across. So if the other person is perceiving, from his perspective, is perceiving that you are not listening actively or involved in the discussion, he or she might feel neglected and not to be appreciated in a sophisticated way. So that is what Václavic found out. Every reaction has a communicative character. Even if I don't know, if I'm closing the eyes or looking outside of the window, looking onto the watch. So, and in fact, this non-verbal communication is, as we will see in the second axiom, this non-verbal communication is more important than the verbal one. So what is actually being said is not so much of importance. That sounds a bit stupid because we always think that it's the content that matters, but in fact it's not the content that is relevant. It's more how it is perceived. So all the non-verbal communication is paramount. So this is expressed in the second axiom of communication coming from Václavic. Every communication has a content and a relationship aspect, and the latter determines the former. So the relationship aspect, what is not being expressed verbally, is paramount, is of paramount importance. So every act of communication, he says, contains, beyond pure factual information, which is called the content aspects, in German Inhaltsaspekt, an indication of how the transmitter wants to understand his message and how he sees the relationship with the recipient. And that is the relationship aspect. So, but the relationship aspect determines how the content should be interpreted. So that is actually what is paramount. And that is also expressed in a nice analogy and a model of communication which is called the Iceberg Model of communication. In the Iceberg Model of communication, which I explained in my book in depth, this is based on the foundings of Václavic on the two axioms of communication. We have on the above the surface, we have this the peak of the iceberg here, which is the rational level, which is the content level. And that is actually what somebody is expressing verbally. But what is more important is what is underneath the surface, which is the relationship level. But this is not visible. It is not the factual level, but it is more important because people are very, very sensitive here. And what I like about the iceberg model is, if I go back to the blackboard here, what I like about the iceberg, if we have the water here, and we have an iceberg here, and an iceberg here, so resembling now not two walkie-talkies, but two people, person B and person A. Where do they meet first? Where do they meet first? They meet first underneath the water, underneath the surface. So they meet on the relationship level. So actually what is being said here on the factual level, on the content level, is not so important. Of course, it is also an element what is coming across. However, what is more important is the relationship level. Therefore, I love this metaphor of communication being an iceberg. A colleague of mine who was actually my teacher at the University of Hamburg, is Professor Dr. Schulz von Thun. Von Thun was a professor at the University of Hamburg, and being a German professor, he became world famous for his model of communication. And he was the inventor of the so-called four-sided model, of the four-sided aspect model of communication, the communication square. And here you can see in the communication square, you can see the Watzlawick or the Iceberg model. You have the factual content. That is the knowledge I provide. That is what I'm expressing in my words. Which topics do I want to address? What arguments, reasons, and examples do I have? And the relationship level is underneath the surface, how I relate to the other person. So here climate and relationship come into place. So that is the iceberg model. You may paint an iceberg like that into the communication square. And Schulz von Thun added two more aspects to communication. He said, we also have an appeal side. An appeal side, that is what I want to achieve, what I want the other person to do, what I want the other person to think. So, what wishes and demands do I have for the other person? And every communication is also containing a so-called self-revelation aspect. What I present will be understood by me. So what are my feelings and my needs? What do I want to tell them? And this is Schulz von Thun. He was born in 1944. And Schulz von Thun, like I said, invented this four-sided model of communication. On the factual level, let's go into a little bit more depth of the conversation. The factual information is brought across. So all kinds of information, all kinds of facts and circumstances are communicated. It is very important for the transmitter, for the sender, to convey the facts clearly and understandably, right? You have this KISS principle, keep it short and simple. The receiver, who has kept his factual ear open, can listen to the information, facts, and the circumstances, and have many opportunities to ask questions according to the three above mentioned criteria. What is important to understand in this Schulz von Thun model, I'm going back to this one here, is that every communication always involves these four aspects, whether we wish it or don't wish it to happen. We are always communicating with four mouths, for example. And the other person we are communicating towards is always listening with four ears, literally. So therefore, sometimes it's also called the four ears model of communication. We'll see that if we look at an example that Schulz von Thun is providing. Self-disclosure. So if somebody gives an information from himself, if I'm talking about Donald Trump or I don't know, whatever, certain kind of researcher or a certain kind of book or a certain kind of author, I'm also giving something away about myself. Every statement contains, whether intended or not, a self-disclosure. So an indication of what is going on in the transmitter that revolves around the heart of what I stand for and how I perceive myself and the world around me. So this fact makes every message a little taste of one's personality. So how I'm talking about a political party, how I'm talking about an incident that happened, how I'm talking about another person is also indicating how I perceive the world to be, what my image is about the other person. So it's a kind of self-disclosure. That is what Schulz von Thun wants to bring across. So while the transmitter reveals the information about himself through this self-declaration thing, implicitly or explicitly, the receiver looks for indications of this thought. What does this tell me about the other person? What kind of person is he or she like? Because the more I'm able to understand the personality of the other person, the better I'm able and in a position to tailor my argumentation to suit or to be on the same wavelength as the receiver. Because the better I'm in a position to tune in my frequency of communication to the frequency of the receiver, the better I'm able and in a position to convince him or her. Not to persuade, but to convince. The relationship side, we talked about that looking at Václavík. Whether we wish it or not, every time we talk to some people, we are conveying by wording, tone, voice, facial expressions, what we intend to say, but also by which the other person will judge us. So every communication therefore contains a reference to relationship for which the recipient, and that is important, often has an oversensitive relationship ear. That is also coming across again in this model of the iceberg here. The other person, and we are all, of course, we are oversensitive when it comes to the relationship level. Think about the story I was giving to you when I was working in London here. So we are very sensitive here. What does the other person think of me and what is his attitude towards me? And the appeal side, finally, if somebody accepts what is spoken to him, they will typically be influenced what is said. Not only will he communicate with the other, but he will also accomplish something through the contact. So openly or overtly or covertly at this level, one is open to request, appeals, advice, instructions, effects, etc. So the appeal side is what I want the other person to think, what I want the other person to do. Now, here is what I was referring to before. We have a different kind of communication model here according to Schulz von Thun. Here we have the sender, and the sender is always communicating with 4 aspects. And the receiver, whether he or she wishes that to happen or not, is always perceiving the message through 4 ears, right? So the factual ear, the appeal side ear, the relationship ear, and the self-revelation ear. Let's look at this famous example. This is supposed to be a couple. I don't know. I don't know whether Schulz von Thun was painting that himself. But here's the gentleman, here's the male, and here's the female. Here's the lady, and we don't know in the book of Schulz von Thun communicating with each other. He's not describing in which kind of tonality or which kind of facial expression one has here, but we can assume that. So he's asking, why is the soup green, or what is the green in the soup? What is the green in the soup? He's eating the soup that his wife made for him, and she's saying, oh my God, if you don't like it, you can just have something else, or you can go to a restaurant. Now let's look at the underneath the microscope what is happening here. He's saying on the factual level something is green, the soup is green. So you can see that there is no misunderstanding on the factual level. On the factual level, he's saying something is green. She's realizing something is green. Now, his relationship is indicating you should know this. You should know this because you made the soup. But she perceived it. You're a bad cook. You're a bad cook. On the relationship, she realizes that to be criticism. His appeal is, tell me what it is, but she perceives it to be, next time leave the green thing out as an appeal. He's saying on the self-revelation side, I don't know what it is because I'm asking you, and she understood, I don't like the taste. It is a brilliant, very, very simple example to explain and demonstrate why communication is so complicated. Because that is happening not only in private life, but also in business life every day, millions of times. The better we are able to understand this communication model in depth, the better we are in a position then to tailor our argumentation, to tailor our tonality to the recipient. And the better we are in a position to do that, the less misunderstanding, the less disturbance, the less noise we'll have in communication, privately and professionally. Another example from 𝗪𝗪𝗏. The course of a conversation is significantly influenced by the aspect we react to. So, as listeners, we always have the freedom to choose what we want to hear. But we think the message is the most important thing, but it is not. So there's a couple. So it's a kind of a battle between the sexes that 𝗪𝗪𝗏 is describing in a funny way. And the two are sitting in the car, and the female driver is I don't know, is stopping the car in front of a traffic light, and or it's intended to stop. And the man is saying, the traffic light is green. So the traffic light has turned green. The traffic light is green. There is no misunderstanding again on the information level. But 𝗪𝗪𝗏 said that miscommunication can happen if you look at the other aspects of communication. So on the self-disclosure side, the recipient may understand, I'm in a hurry. Look, it's green. Go ahead. I'm in a hurry. On the relationship level, it can be perceived you don't pay attention. On the appeal side, drive faster. So you can see that even when it comes to simple things, not complex problems, miscommunication can happen very, very quickly if we are not sensitive enough to what we are saying. And how we are saying that may be perceived by the other person because they have an oversensitive relationship ear. So the relationship level decides. So here we have the sender and the receiver. The traffic light is green. You don't take care, I must take care of you. So the reaction of the receiver depends mainly which signals are perceived by him or her at the relationship, at the non-factual level. Therefore, communication psychologists, they argue that the factual level, the factual content level, is only making up 7% of the final message. So only 7% of communication is actually the factual level. 93% are non-content related aspects of communication. And this is also in line what we've said before, what Watzlawick said, what is in the Iceberg model of communication, that the majority of the communication process is happening underneath the water. It is non-explicit. It is more this implicit thing. Okay, so self-esteem, probably we can talk a little bit about that before we finish up. So I don't want to keep the lectures too long now, but let's talk a little bit about self-esteem, Selbstwertgefühl. Self-esteem is of central importance for communication. And what is it? Self-esteem is the central unit of being to which ultimately everything refers to. Self-esteem. What are we doing? We build a picture not only about the world around us, not only about the persons we are communicating towards, but we are making an image of everything and also about ourselves. So we build a picture of ourselves as well. And this image we make is the one we use to compare ourselves to others. Consciously or subconsciously, we are constantly determining ourselves in relation to others. Is the other person greater, stronger, smarter, better looking, better educated, etc., etc. And what we are doing, we are acting on the basis of this self-image. Our estimation of ourselves is used as the basis of all of our actions, all of our thinking, not reality, whatever reality may be. Not the reality. Think about the example I was giving, Pablo Escobar. He thought of himself, he was acting on the basis of his self-image. So everybody has the perception that his world of reality, so there's a couple, oh, there are dolphins. This is the only possible perspective, right? Is the correct one, is the only one. This self-image does not have to correspond to the reality. But if the discrepancy between the self-image and the reality is too strong, it's too big, then communication suffers, of course. And if communication suffers, then our self-esteem also suffers. What are the implications here? I can go over that. We talked about that we can only assess our self-esteem. There's a typo here, that's a German one. It should be self-esteem. Through the comparison of ourselves with others. We are always partially dependent on others' assessment of ourselves to recognize our value. It is a bit, I don't know, cruel or difficult to talk about people, of the value of people, because it cannot be quantified, of course. However, what we all do need is, we need affirmation, we need appreciation, of course, recognition. And if other people do see me in a positive light, this is increasing my self-esteem. If other people see me in a negative light, this is a threat to my self-esteem. And whatever we do, and all the others do the same, we are consciously or unconsciously trying always to obtain, defend, or even improve our self-esteem. What does it mean for communication? If you're communicating with your boss, if you're communicating to subordinates, if you're communicating to your fellow peers and student colleagues. It is optimal when communicating to always be aware of the self-esteem of others. Whenever another self-esteem is injured, is attacked, communication suffers. Whether the other person is right or wrong doesn't make any difference. So therefore, for example, one implication is a very powerful one. If somebody is talking to you and is saying, yeah, your company did a bad job because this happened, it is not wise to say then, this is not true, I don't agree. I think you're attacking the self-esteem of the other person in this very moment in time. So the other person doesn't feel recognized, doesn't feel reassured. So communication is not helping here. It's more a tennis match. But you have to move to a higher level. Saying the other person is wrong is not helping. So because you're wrong saying like this, we should take into consideration this aspect, etc., etc. This is not sophisticated communication. What is a better communication is, in all instances, is to say, I see your point. You're disappointed. And because of that, I would suggest the following. I tell you, closing remarks, I tell you a little story about one of my first books I was writing. I was writing altogether more than 40 books and all different kind of editions here. And also a book which is a global bestseller about communication. It's called This Convinced, right? How to communicate successfully in private and business life. And it's been now in the 3rd edition. And the first edition, not of this book, but of the first book I was writing, the first textbook I was writing on business administration with a colleague. And there was a student who was writing me an email, and he was complaining in a very rude tone. He was writing to me like that. So he was writing me an email. Dear Mr. Opresnik, my university teacher advised me to buy your book on business administration. This is the worst book I've ever read. It's absolutely crap. I've never read a book being inferior to this one. This is the worst thing I've ever read. How dare you write such a book? It's absolutely bullshit and crap, and it's ridiculous. And because on the first page there's already a comma lacking, and on the second page there's a hyphen lacking, and then you forgot a question mark on the 30th page or so on. How dare you, right? It should be ashamed. And I told all my fellow student colleagues not to buy the book, and I'm so disappointed, and goodbye. So it was a bit like that. It was very rude. And of course, how can I react, right? So looking at the self-esteem here, of course, it is quite normal and it is human to react, to be angry and say, who is he, right? In his email, he made a couple of mistakes as well, spelling wise. So what is he complaining about, right? But I answered like that. I said, dear Mr. Müller, thank you very much for taking the time to write to me personally. If I were you, I would feel disappointed as well. You, of course, as a reader, can expect a flawlessly written book. Unfortunately, this is not the case because, this is not an excuse but an explanation. Due to the injury of a person in the publisher's office, there was not enough capacity to proofread the book in a sophisticated and proper way. And because of that, and we were pushed by the publisher to publish the book prior to the winter semester, there are admittedly more mistakes than there should be in the book. And we regret this and we apologize for that. Moving forward, your email tells me that you are a very thorough reader, and because of that, and if your time allows that to happen, I would ask you to email me every week the mistakes you find in the book in order to ensure that the second edition of the book is, with your help, free of any kind of spelling mistakes and other errors. If you're okay with that, I would mention you in the foreword of the second edition of this book to show my acknowledgement for the work and support you did for us and the publisher. Of course, I asked the publisher to send you 5 books free of charge to compensate not for your work but for your disappointment. Thanks again for taking the time to write to me personally. I remain faithfully yours, Marc Opresnik. It just took him 2 minutes to respond, and then he responded like that. Dear Professor Dr. Marc Opresnik, first of all, I have to apologize for my rude behavior and tone. I was so disappointed that I discovered that many mistakes in the book, but actually, content-wise, it is the best book I ever read on business administration. And I deleted my review on Amazon, and I entered a 5-star review on Amazon, and I thankfully accept your generous offer to proofread the book in order to come out with a better edition next time. And I recommended all my fellow student colleagues to buy the book, and I'm very, very happy that you give me the opportunity to prove that I'm a fine person. Thanks again for your generosity. And then he was writing, your friend, Max Müller. Now, I think that is a nice story, because what would have helped it to criticize him? What to give in to that, and then we would have this tennis match. So I was appreciating, I was reassuring his self-esteem, I was not okay with the tone that he was using in his first email. However, I was linking that. I was picking up his point and saying, I see your point. So I was tuning into his. I was trying to get into his position, see the world through his eyes, and say, yes, you can expect a flawlessly written book. And because of that, I would suggest that to cut a long story short, I'm still in contact with him. He's proofreading all of my books. So if you find any mistakes in my books now, we should inform him. So I love that. It's a nice story. And I end it here. So our first or our second live session. Stay in the line. We'll have now a quiz. And first of all, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thanks very much. And we have the next live session next week. But stay in the line. I just end the recording here. Thanks very much. Cheers and bye-bye.